What's happening, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Austin, and welcome back to the DevvE Roundup with myself and Tom Anderson. Tom, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, Austin.
Good to see you. Good to see you. So, it's bloody out there. I don't want to pull any punches. I mean, the markets are, just what they are. There's the threat of war on multiple fronts in the geopolitical arena. But on the back end, we're still full speed ahead, regardless of what the markets look like. And so I'm excited to chat with you today. What has been going on in the back end at DevvE and Dev Digital?
Yeah. So as usual, number of things going on. One thing that was pretty neat this week was I saw a new full design of the DevvE user interface, particularly on the kind of lending platform side of things. Looks very clean and slick and nice. And when you take kind of a nice clean approach that you can just post your asset and then, borrow off of it or whatever, or post your asset and then lend off of it, both directions. But then you power that with all of the stuff that the DevX platform has, the front theft loss protections, the privacy solution, all that. Like it really is going to be a compelling platform. So for me, seeing the user interface design and all of that in place, was really compelling. So that was just kind of a fun highlight, this week. We had another mechanical piece that I think is pretty important is we've got our OAuth integration going where we can control differently how people log in. So from end users perspective, one of the big advantages there is you'll be able to have two-factor authentication, when you're signing in, and it'll just more broadly let us more easily kind of integrate with other systems, things like that. So getting that to a next phase is pretty important. And then another of the things that we're working on that's kind of, again, mechanical, moving forward step by step, and things are progressing well, is the interactions with the big partner and their systems. So they kind of have definitions within their software, and we have to fill in the blanks to what definitions, what kind of tokens we want to integrate that'll be working on the our exchange with that integrates with their technology. And then in particular, one of the things that we've been designing is the overall interface layer. And so it kind of abstracts out the interactions with their software, where it just makes it where we can, interact with a black box that kind of incorporates what their software does. And I know I'm being a little bit vague on it, but I'm still kind of walking that line where giving people updates, things are moving ahead with them well. The technology integration's going well, but not quite ready to announce it. So I'm I think understandably being a little bit vague, but it is going well. And building that interface layer, I think, is important. So each of those are kind of things that I and the team been working over this last week. And then one thing in particular that I've been working on myself, on more the biz dev side of things, is working with companies and treasuries, and exploring with some large investment banks, what we might be able to do with public companies that are creating treasuries of crypto. And so that's actually like a really hot category that's sprung up just in a matter of months. A lot of public companies are creating treasuries of crypto. And I think the fundamental just kind of problem, that a lot of these companies are going to run into is this concept, holds while the crypto space is going up. But what happens, when the crypto space starts going down? And a lot of these companies that are creating treasuries are not building an actual business model around crypto. It's just kind of a fad, type of thing. And that type of thing never goes well for companies, right? Like if you just kind of follow a fad and then it's hot for a while and then goes down, you just have to pay the piper later, right? Whereas with us, especially with the DevvE platform, we can create yield on treasuries. And so we're exploring the concept of, it's early, so it's just an exploration, seeing if there's something to be done there. But we're exploring potentially even having the DevvE technology reside in a public company that creates its own treasury. Or another thing is potentially partnering with all of these other companies that are creating treasuries and working with them, to create yield. And so that's a pretty exciting set of conversations I've been having the last week or so.
You gave me a lot to work with there. Okay, I'm gonna pull us back a little bit. You were talking about the big partner integration, and I heard, and I have no way of really knowing if this is true, but you might, that we are the first, this is a full chain integration. And so are we really the first chain that this big partner has actually integrated with?
Yeah, it's the first kind of core integration with their technology. The first time where the result is an exchange platform where transactions are guaranteed to settle. I mean, that's huge. And the very first time where when transactions are matched together, that they settle instantly. And that's huge, right? And so this is a brand new just paradigm for exchanges, and they have a lot of technology that just rounds out all the stuff that we're doing, all of the reporting, and then all of the business partnerships that this entity has as well. So when you really have kind of a fundamentally new type of exchange approach, combined with a larger company's operations and technology, it's really exciting what all's coming together.
That is exciting. I think the community will appreciate, us at least wading a little bit into that pool to give them, some inkling of what that is. Excellent. And so I want to talk to you about the crypto treasuries, because that got my brain a little bit fired up. So we're doing something a little bit different, at least for the larger crypto assets, and that we're going to be using bailment partners on chain as opposed to your traditional escrow one side, mint on the other side, burn release sort of bridge that most of crypto uses amongst the various chains. And so how does that play into treasuries? Because if a treasury wanted to take their Bitcoin and let's say, I don't know, put it into wrapped Bitcoin or something of that nature, right? They're going to be reliant on either swapping out of it or being reliant on a bridge or something of that nature. And so does that play into the comfort level that perhaps these different corporate treasuries would look for?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good phrasing of kind of the heart of the value we're bringing to the table. So I had a call this morning, actually about a half hour before this call we wrapped up, and it was with a large investment bank, and it's an investment bank that has been putting together a lot of these treasury deals, right? So these are guys that are at the very front line, understand everything that's going on, and they really liked that, like, we have an ability to actually use the treasury, not just create a treasury. And so at one point, the fellow on the call was like oh, so you actually take the treasury and do something with it. Right? So if you have Bitcoin in a treasury and you don't need to do anything with it, you just hold the Bitcoin, right? That's straightforward. But if you want to then implement it within a lending platform, for example, then it needs to be a wrapped token, because you can't implement that on the Bitcoin chain itself, of course, right? So then it needs to be a wrapped token. But the context of all of these conversations again are traditional finance, public companies. And so if you want to wrap Bitcoin and use it and do it in a way that's acceptable for TradFi companies, then you have to have that kind of wrapped nature implemented in a way that's acceptable. And so that's what we've been putting together, is this bailment solution. So bailment is when somebody else holds an asset, and then creates kind of a representation of that asset. So the wrapped tokens, implementing that where the assets held in the bailment process are held by professional institutions and even insured, by big insurers that TradFi can trust. And so that's night and day compared to what else is out there. And this is the heart of the big challenge when all of this new money wants to come into the space and all these new concepts are starting to touch into the traditional finance world. The crypto space is going to have to move into the ways that they operate. It won't be the opposite. I guarantee it. Like, it won't happen. That's it will be a barrier until crypto works the way that TradFi, is willing to operate, because TradFi runs on regulatory requirements and fiduciary responsibilities and things that they legally can't just do things the way crypto does it. They have to do things the way that the law defines it, which means crypto is going to have to, operate the way that they need it to operate. And so things like a bailment process that, avoids, bankruptcy complications, things like removing, these big theft risks and private key loss risks, things like maintaining privacy but doing it in a regulatory compliant way. And so when you look at, again, checking those boxes, and we've talked about that before, but checking the boxes that TradFi needs, but in this particular kind of concept is a big opportunity because it's hot space right now. And so again, the bankers I was talking to this morning, they love the concept because they admitted, like, this is like, they're making their money now putting these deals together, but like these companies are going to run into problems if the markets go down. It works well while they're going up, or while they're generally up, and so they really like the concept of having, an actual operating business tied in with the assets themselves.
All right. So I'm curious about a few things. I think we've probably touched on a really interesting topic here earlier on. You had talked about we can generate yield, right? And we do very well with our fraud, theft, and loss protection and a privacy protection in that, we mitigate a lot of risk. But anytime I hear the word yield, right, it's always counteracted with some type of risk. There's always risk when yield is involved. And so I have two questions for you. One, what are the various ways that these treasuries could generate yield, but also what is the risk to them aside from, having, their private keys stolen or something like that?
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily risk that defines yield. I think it's utility that has trade-offs. So sometimes it's risk. Sometimes, where you can earn yield is around risk. And I think a general rule in finance, just broadly 20,000 foot view, not DeFi, not TradFi, just in general, all finance is higher risk. It gives you higher potential returns, but the risk, kind of balances with that. The part of where I'm distinguishing now the yield with, where we can create. So distinguishing that it's not just risk that can create yield is, in our case, it's the actual kind of usage of the assets. And so the trade-off then is that the asset becomes encumbered, in the system. But it actually is very low risk. I'm debating in my mind if I would call it no risk. Is there anything that's no risk, right? So, but very, very low risk, type of situation, which again, TradFi, especially kind of a lending platform, wants, right? So you put your assets into, these pools, and then when somebody borrows that asset, so puts their own collateral up, and then gets that asset in return for that collateral, then they have that asset to use as they want. The reason I say it's very low risk is because it's, designed like Aave's system, where, there's an automatic liquidation if the health kind of factor of that particular loan reaches a threshold. And so from the lender's point of view, if somebody wants to borrow Bitcoin because they need to use it for their trading strategy to hedge, or to manage, a long position, or whatever they might need a particular asset outside of a fiat, coin, they can borrow, assets from any of these to manage kind of their own financial operations. But if they don't manage it well, then it'll automatically get liquidated and then transferred back to the asset. So the lenders don't actually have a lot of risk. So it's more, in this case, I think, the utility than the risk that's creating the yield. And what makes that work it's just the fact that there's demand for borrowing and lending. Both sides, there's a lot of demand. There's a lot of people that own crypto that would want to borrow, a stable coin or fiat, that type of thing, and get access to the underlying value and manage, the health of the loan, which is manageable, but still use those assets for other kind of financial operations. And then that creates an interest rate, that creates interest on an interest rate. And then the lenders, see that there's demand there. And so they want to put their assets into it, especially in a situation that's kind of low risk. And so there's demand on both sides of the table, for these lending platforms. And what that fundamentally then leads to is the ability to create yield on the underlying assets. And so I think it is a low risk thing. It is something that can create yield. And given that so many entities are now creating these treasuries, why not make some yield on it? That's different from, I'll also point out it's different from a lot of the other places where people might want to get yield. Like staking, kind of fundamentally is, and there's situations where it's not, where it's sustainable longer term, but a lot of times it's not. A lot of times staking is just more of a game, like how can we lock up tokens so that, they're not sold, and it diminishes the supply, and the supply demand curve, drives the price up, right? But it's just a game.
So you were talking about the lending, and I had a couple of questions that came up. So I've got, I spent years in the trenches of DeFi, and I know one of the beauties of Aave is that, when either the lend side or the borrow side becomes scarce, the APYs jack up to attract, either repayment or more loan side. And I'm curious, is that how our yield is going to work on our side as well?
Yeah, it works. It works the same way. So I think the mechanics of it will be the same, but I think the implementation of it probably will be a bit different because again, you've got bigger entities with more money coming in, and so I think it's gonna be in the same way that we're taking the innovation of DeFi and bringing it to TradFi. I think a big part of what we're doing is bridging the two, right? So you're going to have the scope and magnitude and requirements and safety of TradFi, coming into these kind of innovative types of mechanics. And so I think it is going to have those same curves that you're talking about, but I think in actual usage it'll probably be bigger amounts across a smaller subset of types of tokens, will be a majority of, I think, what's traded. I think we'll be able to also create, therefore, our own revenue off of much more money, which is great for us and fits in with, again, this kind of public company concept, that we're exploring, looking into. So that's all appealing. But I also think one of the things that we probably will want to do, just rounding out the thought, is have the abilities to have lesser tokens in our platform, and there's probably some level of appetite, even for TradFi, to diversify more and maybe have a higher risk, special purpose vehicle type of fund or something like that. And so in that case, it would actually probably more use those kind of curves as well. So yeah, I think both, all along the spectrum, even in the TradFi space. Yeah.
Well, one area where, because there's umpteen number of either compound or Aave forks on every chain, and some of them have gotten in a lot of trouble by offering non-ultra premium assets. Most of them will start with like wrap Bitcoin, Ethereum, and USDT only because they're super liquid, right? And that they're premium assets. But what starts happening along the way when they feel the health of the platform is good is they start putting on their, like, the main coin of the chain, not the chain coin, but like the biggest DEX or something like that, right? Where price can be manipulated. And there's been a lot of, they weren't even Oracle attacks. They were just somebody driving up price on a centralized exchange, then using that token as their collateral, sucking out the USDT and then letting the price crash back down, or you've got an asset that can't be liquidated because somebody put way too much on the lend side, right? And they borrowed against it, and there's not enough liquidity for the lenders to liquidate on. So I'm assuming, are we sticking to like ultra premium assets on this lending platform?
Well, that'll be the majority of what's used, but one difference on what you just described, and I think this is a compelling aspect of what we're doing, is we're designing it where different entities can maintain and control different pools, and then liquidity caches, and then put their own rules around it. So although there's tokens that, in situations where you don't have a lot of liquidity, where people can then manipulate the markets, and then create situations where, again, they drain a lot of the value. In our case, we don't care those dynamics so much. What we're creating is the platform, and we get revenue off of the transactions either way, right? And then if there's people that want to step in and fill in demand for tokens, then they'll be able to start up their own liquidity cache, put the rules around it. Probably will want to put rules that minimize the risk of those types of manipulations, but you end up with kind of tokens that are common, that have lots of liquidity, that everybody uses. Those will be used by like the Delu box out there, right? But then you'll have other entities that say like, well, at the far end of the spectrum are just tokens that are just far too dangerous. But where do you draw that line? And there'll probably be entities that want to kind of push that. And again, you take more risk, and so then the percentages go up. But there's going to be people that still want to use the platform. And so I think what I envision will turn into a pretty robust, dynamic solution where lots of entities can come in and drive things to their own kind of risk tolerances. So
am I right to say, and from what it sounded like, if an entity creates their own pool, that pool is in effect siloed off from the rest, right? They're taking their own risk. It either goes well or it doesn't go well, but they're not going to affect the overall health of the platform. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay. I totally understood what you were saying there. Awesome. Well, Tom, I think this was an awesome roundup. I like the peaks that we're getting into the back end when you and I chat here. So good deal. Anything you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I think that's a good wrap for this week. So looking forward to continuing doing it.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy. Thanks for tuning in, guys. My name's Austin. I'll catch y'all on the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.